Hello, bundlers. It is Mariam. Long time no see, listen, whatever. I really miss you guys. I miss being here in the virtual studio, but I'm so excited to be back here with Lily to be recording our next episode, Intern Blues. Yay! For those of you who have been listening, you're probably aware that Lily and I just started our intern year of residency. And if you're not aware, we just started our intern year residency back in, what was it, July? I guess that was the start.
July
official.
1st. Actually, mine started like June 24th, so it was a little earlier.
Yeah, like orientation and all that stuff. Yeah. So we are interns. For those who are not in the medical field or just less familiar with like how doctor training goes, intern year is your first year of residency training. You are still considered a resident, but you get a very special title to designate you, or I guess like, what's the word? Set you apart from all the rest of the other residents because you are fresh and new and everybody in the hospital needs to know that. And so intern year, it comes with lots of new challenges, lots of new responsibility, but it's a mixed bag, I think, for most people. And so I hope this episode just sheds some light into the raw, vulnerable experience of two interns who are, more than halfway through intern year now and incredibly burnt out, but also trying to find meaning in this process and, trying to be the doctors that they always dreamed to be. So anyways, Lily,
the good,
first
the bad,
of all,
the ugly.
the good, the bad, and the ugly. I feel like for most of my friends who are like interns that I haven't spoken to in a long time, I like want to do like a little check-in. Lily, how are you doing?
Yeah, that's so nice of you, because I feel like we all have you ever heard that analogy where it's like you have spoons and then you give out your spoons throughout the day and it signifies like how much energy you have to give out, and at the end of the day you have to make sure you have enough spoons to like feed yourself or take care of yourself. And I'm like, I feel like intern year is a lot of like giving out your spoons, so it's nice that you check on other interns because I usually don't have enough spoons to be able to do that. But I don't know, I think this episode will be really interesting for us to chat about, mostly because we have two very, very different experiences. One of them is surgical and one of them is medicine, non-surgical medicine at least. So I'm curious to kind of see what your experience has been like and what mine has. And before we dive in any further, we just want to put a disclaimer out there that all the views that we share on this podcast are those of our own and they don't represent any kind of institution or employer, as we kind of just chat about our experiences.
Yeah.
I think for me, like, life hit me really hard this year. And so putting that kind of into the perspective of my intern year, I think a lot of things that I hear my peers talk about or vent about sometimes doesn't correlate to how I feel, because I think like, oh, I'd rather be busy and be in the hospital for long hours than have to go home and like deal with my actual life. So I think that's definitely changed how I've experienced intern year. Not really. Oh, someone is ringing my doorbell. I'm so sorry.
Oh my God, you have a delivery.
Now the dogs are going to bark. Sorry, Chloe. We might have to pause while we figure out who is ringing my doorbell. And nobody was there.
Weird.
No one was there. We'll have to check the cameras later. Anyways, that was bizarre. Did you hear the doorbell ring though? Or is that
No.
Okay.
It's going to be on the episode.
That's so funny. But yeah, so my experience has been very different, and that's kind of framed how I view my intern year. But that also doesn't take away from the fact that intern year is exhausting and mentally draining and just a lot of learning and making mistakes. But how do you feel? How's intern year been?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely So the funny thing with when you were talking about the spoon analogy, my first thought was I'm like at minus 20 spoons right now. Like that's how I feel at the end of the day sometimes.
No.
But like, I think it's also interesting because when you were talking about like, when you have like these personal life stressors like affecting your life, your work does become kind of like a way to just kind of get out of your head. And I think that's the nature of intern year is like your brain is totally dedicated to the work and it's totally dedicated to, patient care and figuring out the hospital system and learning the medicine and the practical skills that it takes to be trained in your specialty. And that in and of itself can be, a really good coping mechanism for a lot of people who are just like ready to dive in, or if it's like a good distraction. I think for me, this year hit me a lot harder than I expected it to. I knew intern year was going to be really difficult. The hard work, the long hours, the difficult patient interactions, the bad patient outcomes, because in OBGYN, there are bad outcomes, which is something, again, that I hadn't anticipated as much of, can really get to you. But I think it's the thing that I struggle with the most, like from a mental health perspective, isn't even that, although certainly all those things don't help. It's really the constant criticism, the constant feedback, the constant people just watching you and expecting you to mess up because you are so new and you just feel like a little baby like all the time, but not in like a good way, like in a way of like, I'm so dumb. I'm constantly messing up. I don't know about you, Lily, but I feel like in OBGYN, and I don't think this is specific to my program, but I think, the nature of the specialty and the training, especially like a surgical specialty, is constant feedback, because not only do you have to learn the medicine, you also have to have like the procedural skills and like the skills, especially on labor and delivery. And so it's constant feedback. And as an intern, almost like none of it is positive. Like a lot of the time, it's really just like, hey, you could have done this better. And there have been so many days where like you're putting so much energy and so much time into patient care, and you're running around and you're like, okay, I did this, I feel good about my work. And then, an attending or a senior resident comes up to you and was like, you weren't fast enough, or why did you do this? You should have done this. And I think that for me personally has been the hardest part of the year, is just like, it's not the hard work. It's not the long hours. It's really just like the constant criticism and the constant like feedback, because intern year is humbling. It's just humbling.
Yeah. It's like expecting to know how to run when you're just learning how to walk.
Exactly.
Like you're drowning, and yet it's like this race that you need to constantly feel like you're catching up on. I definitely think your perspective is interesting with like the immediate feedback that you get being in the OR of like doing something, and then having whoever's there in the room with you giving you that like instant feedback. I think in medicine, it's a little bit more different. I mean, you do get that feedback. Sometimes it tends to be like towards the end of your week or rotation with the team. And then other times it just feels like, at least for me, being like a medicine prelim, which for those of you who don't know what a prelim is, it's a preliminary year intern. It basically is a group of people who go into like radiology, anesthesia, dermatology, neurology, and you do a year of medicine before you do your field of interest that you specifically applied into. So I am an internist this year in specifically medicine, and then I'll do neurology next year. So for me, it's also been really weird of like spending a year practicing a lot of medicine that doesn't really apply to the specific specialty I'll be going into. Definitely chunks of it do apply. And I think as a doctor, we should all be able to treat very like basic, important, emergent things in patients and not be too scared to like, know a patient has diabetes or an AKI or whatever and know how to treat that. But it also means that I don't really learn a lot specifically about the field that I applied into. So it's interesting to also meet the expectations of people whose like field you won't be in long term either. So I've had like a small identity crisis this year of being like, oh, wow, I'm like getting really good at like treating heart failure, but then remembering like I won't actually be treating heart failure in my day-to-day practice.
Yeah. You're just going to have lots of patients with heart failure. And then you'll be like, go to your PCP. Oh my God. But also like internal medicine, like that medicine prelim year, medicine residents work so freaking hard. As an OBGYN, I can like really appreciate this because my program, we don't rotate on other services. We're always like on OB or GYN rotations, which thank God, because there are some programs that have you rotate like on emergency or you do a block of medicine. And honestly, like medicine, you guys get, not saying like you're a medicine doctor, but like this prelim year, like you're doing medicine, you guys admit like every patient in the hospital that like nobody else wants. I'm just like, it's insane. Like medicine is really, really hard. So even though like the surgical aspect of things, like being a surgeon, being trained surgically is really, really challenging. I also see the other side of it where like the medicine teams are like taking literally everybody, even surgical patients, and taking care of them because the surgical specialties are like, nah, we don't want this patient. Like, It's funny because I'm on the GYN oncology service right now, which is like it's a surgical service, right? GYN oncologists are like mostly surgeons. And anytime we have like a patient with some type of like gyne malignancy come in, medicine is like, can you please take this patient? And we're like, no, they have pyelonephritis, or no, they have an AKI. You got it. Like, you know, which is like, it's just the interest, you know, the politics of the hospital too are really interesting. And that obviously like differs from each like hospital that you're in. But those are all just kind of like really interesting things to notice too, I think, as an intern, is like figuring out the systems that you're working in and how that kind of contributes to your training as well.
I have a lot of respect for like medicine docs after this year, even though I'm not completely done yet. But I genuinely feel like every 2 weeks, I'm like interviewing for a whole new job. Mm-hmm. Someone who's going to be going into neurology, like next week, I'm going to be on the surgical trauma ICU, which is like
have fun.
Petrifying. I know, it's like literally terrifying. And then I've been in like the medical ICU. I've been on cardiology. Like I'll be in like the pulmonology clinic one day. And it's just wild just how much falls under medicine, and being on the other side of talking to consulting services like neurology or like pulm or like OB-GYN or all these other ones. It gives you like a different view of like, okay, how do I want to be a consultant next year in the future as like an attending or a fellow? Because being on the medicine side, you can tell when you get like a pretty poor consult, or like they're not very helpful, or they're very dismissive, and you're like, don't we just want to take care of this patient? Like, don't you want to help us out? So it has definitely taught me a lot of like examples, at least, that I've had with like different specialties, and like, oh, that's the way that you be a good consultant, versus like, wow, that was actually really poor patient care, and we shouldn't be so dismissive of like when they need this expertise.
Yeah, I think the ways that hospital runs are really interesting. And oh my gosh, I was going to say something and I forgot. There was something that...
Oh no, sorry.
My God, my brain's not working.
It's that intern brain.
It's that intern brain. It's literally, it's like rotting. Actually, that's a great topic to talk about, is intern brain. So like, this episode is called Intern Year Blues. And I feel like that sounds like really depressing, but I think it's important to kind of showcase like the harsh realities of residency training. I think we talked about this in a different episode last season. I remember Margot, I think Howe is also on this episode. But we talked about like how residency training started and how it was pioneered essentially by Dr. William Halstead, who I hope it's Dr. William Halstead. That sounds right. But if that's wrong, please cut that out, Chloe.
Let's Google this really quick.
Can we just fact check me before you put me on blast?
He started the first formal surgical residency training at Johns Hopkins.
Yes. And so he, you know, essentially worked insane hours, and he was addicted. He was literally on coke, and he was literally like, he was on opiates. He was literally taking cocaine, not sustainable way of undergoing residency, and came up with the structure of what residency is right now, which is essentially where doctors in training lived in the hospitals. I think like, obviously things have gotten better. I'm very fortunate to be at a program that's unionized. And I think the ACGME has like tried to implement work hour restrictions. And ours, I think, is like, you can't go over 80 hours a week on average over the span of 4 weeks, which certainly happens. And to speak quite frankly, especially in surgical specialties, but I know this is also like the case for a lot of other specialties too, non-surgical alike. A lot of residents will go over hours, and then they're encouraged to lie about their hours. And I remember hearing that as a med student. I was like, that's crazy. I'll never lie about my hours, you know, like, but this year I can kind of see why people do it, because you go over 80 hours and then you have to report it. And then your program is like, why are you going over hours? Is it because you aren't being efficient? Like, let's work on efficiency, you know?
Yeah.
There's like lots of different problems within the system, I think, that are part of the training process that you're faced with when you're an intern. And then I think over the years, yes, you get more efficient. You kind of build that resilience because you get kind of used to the system and you kind of figure out your way of coping through it. But I think my heart like really goes out to my fellow co-interns, because it's just, the adjustment period is really difficult. I read something on Reddit during this like really, I was having a particularly low day, and I think I had gotten like some really bad feedback, or I just didn't feel very proud of my work and just messed up a lot. I think I Googled something like, is intern year, is this the hardest thing that I'm going to do? And like somebody said something on this like Reddit chain that was like, intern year isn't going to be the hardest thing that you'll ever have to go through, but it's the longest hard thing you'll ever have to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's true. Like intern year is not like the lowest like year of my life, you know, because like we've been through difficult things, whatever, we have resilience, but it's like exhausting and drawn out and the hours are long and it is tough. And I think with all that kind of being over the first half of intern year, I'm trying to think of ways to kind of shift my mindset to make this process a little bit more sustainable. I'm curious, Lily, what things have you been doing this year to kind of create a little bit more balance for yourself when you're working all the crazy hours? I mean, I already know the answer to this because I know Lily. But if you want to share with our viewers or our listeners, I should say.
Yeah, I'll answer that by also kind of going back to what you were talking about with like the intern brain. One thing that really surprised me about residency was how taxing it would be on my body. I had so many like systemic issues with my body this year that I like was not anticipating. I knew intern year would be like stressful on my mind and that I would always feel like I could make a mistake that could be detrimental to a patient's care. But then my body started to harbor all of that stress. And so I noticed whenever I rotate in the ICU, I have horrible heartburn, like horrible heartburn that like starts at 9 a.m. and does not go away until I'm off of the rotation because of how stressed out I am during those weeks on ICU, because you have critically ill patients literally in front of you. And then the constant sounds that you can just imagine of ICU monitors. And when you're on nights, it's just you and a senior who may or may not go and take a nap. And so that is just you.
Yeah.
And I remember my first week on ICU, I was on nights and I didn't know any of the 20 patients. And I was just sitting there listening to the monitors going off by myself.
Oh my God.
It was the most terrifying thing ever, you know?
Yeah.
So I started harboring a lot of like the stress of intern year in my body. So besides that, I also got like the stress runs like every single morning in the middle of
That's
rounds.
real.
Yeah, I was like, I need to go to the bathroom.
You're like, I'm so sorry. I have to leave right now.
It's like horrible. Like my GI tract was a total mess. I was like not eating well. I was running off of a lot of coffee, which I have never drank coffee in my entire life, besides just like for fun, you know, like here and there to coffee.
Side note, Lily used to make fun of me for drinking black coffee. She'd be like,
I know.
She'd be like, that's going to give you diarrhea.
Yes. Also, people who drink black coffee are like a different kind of adult that I will never be. Like I still put creamer in my coffee, but I never drank coffee until I started residency because you don't have time to like make a cute little matcha latte that I used to do in med school. Like you're just like downing a coffee and like gonna go see your patients at like 6 a.m. So, and then, you know, I have like chronic back pain. So like my back pain got awful. Like my sleep was terrible. I would literally wake up stressed out that I had like forgotten to order a lab on a patient. And the first 2 months of intern year, I would literally get home and at like 10 p.m. I would like log on and like check on my patients and like make sure I ordered all of the right labs on them, triple check that like I had finished all my notes. Like it's very like, you know, you did it and you checked your boxes and yet you still feel so anxious because the last thing you want to do is like show up in the morning and have a poor patient outcome that happened because like I missed something. It's so terrifying.
Yeah.
And then when you go home after you sign out, sometimes like I'll get a call about one of my patients from one of the interns that's covering and they'll ask me a question. And sometimes it's not something that was urgent that like they really needed to call me about, but we're also new that we don't want to make sure we're not missing anything. But getting that call just like is also petrifying. So I feel like my body really harbored a lot of the like stress of this year. And I think that was a good and bad thing because one, like you should be scared and you should be stressed and you should really want to keep a close eye on things because these are like real patients that like we are responsible for. But at the same time, sometimes it's like so detrimental because like you're overstressing about things that you did. And we also forget that there's like things in place like a senior and then an attending, the night shift people. Like there's so many things in place to make sure that if something did get missed or if something does happen, there's people there to like address it or like catch it before, you know, it escalates further. And that was something that was really hard for me to kind of like let go of and be like, okay, someone else is checking my work because I just felt like the sole responsibility for the patients I carried.
Oh yeah.
So to kind of cope with like all of those things, I definitely started taking more, I don't want to call them depression naps, but like I know taking more naps that like I used to take the first year of med school when I was just like, I can't even function anymore. So I like started incorporating naps more into my schedule.
They're just called sad girl naps, you know?
I like that. Yeah, we'll call it a sad girl nap. And like that has helped a little bit, I will say. And then I keep Pepto-Bismol in my bag for when I get heartburn, which I'm happy to report I have not had the last few months. So,
Great.
you know, you adjust, I guess, to the stress. And then the thing that I'm sure like Mariam knows that I've been doing is I've been trying to get more into running, which we know Mariam is like our running queen.
Oh, I'm not this year.
Well, I feel like your body has muscle memory, but you're literally a Giselle when you run, and everyone, you know, should be able to witness that magic. I am not.
You are. Lily will literally be like, just ran 8 miles. I'm like, how? I cannot remember the last time I ran 8 miles.
Oh, very, very slowly. But I did pick up running this year. I was inspired by Mariam, and I used to do a lot of like workout classes. But as an intern, you have no autonomy over your schedule. So you never know what day you're going to have off until you show up to work that week. And you also are most likely in the hospital from like 6 a.m. until 7 p.m. So like a lot of the classes I used to take, they're already done by the time I get off work. So I picked up running because I felt like it was something I could do at any hour, you know, safely with someone with me. And then also like at any time I wanted to, I didn't have to worry about like paying for it or signing up for it in advance. And I think that's been really helpful. Although running is really hard too. So sometimes I don't know why I choose to do that during my free time.
Because you get the runner's high. Like it's so good. Honestly, exercise, I feel like in general is so helpful. I actually was thinking about this too, like as somebody who like tried to stay pretty active in med school and even like years prior. I think I've talked about this in other episodes too, but I like suffer from like really bad anxiety, and I always have. It didn't even start in medical school. Like I feel like I've had anxiety since I was like a little kid. But as an adult, I've like learned how to manage it better, and exercise, specifically running, was a really good way to manage my anxiety, because we as healthcare professionals know that like consistent exercise is actually just as effective as, or even probably potentially more effective than like just medication therapy for alleviating symptoms of anxiety, depression, things like that. So like exercise has been like a huge part of my well-being, mental, physical, whatever. But with the time constraints of intern year, it is really challenging to get regular exercise in. And when you were talking about like the severe heartburn that you started to get and like the GI upsets, like I can definitely relate to that. And one thing I also didn't anticipate is like and this might actually, I should give a disclaimer, this might be, you know, potentially triggering for some listeners. So just a fair warning, if you struggle with conversations about weight loss or weight gain, this, you know, you might want to skip ahead. But just something that like I've experienced is because I haven't been able to exercise as much, like I have put on some weight. And that was a little bit difficult too, because I experiencing my body change and like knowing that I couldn't really do much about it because you don't have as much control over your schedule and you don't have as much time. That was something that was really challenging, especially at the beginning of intern year. And just feeling like you're dedicating your whole life to your job and to your patients, which is a really noble thing, especially with patient care, but like how not great it feels when like you see your body essentially deteriorating from it, for lack of a better way of putting it. I think our programs mean well when they say like you have to incorporate. We literally just had like wellness week. I don't know if this is a national thing, ACGME, I don't know, but like we had like a residency wellness week where we were all trying to track our workouts and like all this stuff. I just like thought it was so funny because I was like, this is like we're literally killing ourselves to like squeeze in a 30-minute like workout and then like try to get some sleep and then incorporate wellness. Like it's like another box to check. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, you know, as much as like our programs are well-meaning and incorporating that, like at the end of the day, true wellness probably will not be achieved with this current system that we're working in of like 80 hours a week. And then again, like you do adjust, like you adapt. Like obviously where I'm at right now, I have a better routine for myself than I did even a few months prior. And I think that's like something that's really promising that like I would probably like if there's any med students or pre-med people wanting to go into this field and like are worried about it, like intern year and residency, it does get better. I can say that as an intern in the worst year of residency. Usually intern year is the worst year of residency. It does get better. You do adapt, you do change. Like you have to just trust the process. But there are challenges, and kind of like knowing that ahead of time can be really helpful, and knowing that you're not alone in that. Like that was the other thing. I thought I was the only one who was getting bad feedback. I thought I was the only one who was dealing with like the struggles of how I felt about my body. I thought I was the only one who, just felt bottom of the barrel. But like, no, like talk to your co-interns, talk to your co-residents. Literally, if you're somebody listening to this, literally find me on Instagram and like message me and be like, this sucks. And I'll be like, yeah, I will send you some of my written feedback that some attendings have literally given to me in the OR.
Oh gosh.
Oh my gosh. You know what we should have done, Lily? I should have pulled up my feedback and just like read it during this podcast. I can tell you off the top of my head, they're so bad. They're so bad. Okay. If you guys ever want to feel better about yourselves, listen to this. Okay. So I had feedback, good attitude, but very slow in clinic, even with the help of attendings. Has a good attitude, but below the knowledge base of what I would expect from her and the level of her peers. Needs to work on that. Notably flustered and anxious when presenting patients. Could work on creating actual assessments and plans instead of muttering through the history.
That is so harsh. Oh my gosh.
Can I just say the reason I can laugh about this right now is because I've talked to other residents and they've been like, yeah, same, right? Like we're all just getting a little bit trashed on as interns. I also will say, I think the way that because we're interns, there's so much scrutiny, there's so much surveillance on us. And especially for people who are really anxious, like, we're smart people. We know how to take a good history. We know how to like formulate a decent like differential assessment and plan and all that stuff. But I think when you're doing it under intense scrutiny, you just look and sound a lot dumber than you like actually are.
Doing it to like the experts in the field.
I know
thousands of these cases, and this is your third case.
Exactly.
It's just such a hard spectrum to be like scrutinized on.
And it's like, that's why I laugh, because I'm just like, oh, you forgot what it feels like to be totally scrutinized. It's so funny. Like one time I had a C-section and I scrubbed in with my senior resident who is walking me through it. And at my program, we do the primary C-section. So like start to finish, unless there's something super complicated about the case. And then the attending watches. And the entire time the attending was watching was when I was closing the uterus, which is like the most important part of a C-section, because that like the uterus can hemorrhage and bleed and it's like important. And she made me so nervous because she was like, why are you doing that? Don't do it like that. Do you even know how to tie? Da, 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 da. And I was like, ah. And then when we were closing the subcutaneous and like the skin layers, that's like the easy part. So she just scrubbed out and left. And then I just started like closing. And my senior was like, see, I feel like you do a much better job when the attending isn't around.
The microscope.
Yeah. She was like, you know how to tie, you know how to handle like your suture. Like, well, I don't, she's like, what's the issue? And I was like the constant scrutiny. So I think that's the other hard thing I think about intern years is just like the constant feedback. And that's not necessarily everybody's experience, but I would say if that is like your experience as an intern listening to this episode, I want you to know you're not alone and that they can't fire you because they need you, because you're cheap labor. And to be totally frank, but also like from a more empowering perspective, like you can do this, it is brutal, but you can do this.
I just want to validate that I'm sure you're doing an incredible job, and people are so far out of residency that sometimes they forget what it was like to do their first C-section. And I think that's what makes them so critical. Like I had an attending on like one of my last inpatient wards who really made it a point to like pull me aside and sit down with me and give me a lot of positive feedback, even though I felt like I was just just barely surviving. And like half of my presentations would be like, I really don't know what's going on with this patient. Like, question mark. And like my senior would have the same perspective. And so I felt a little bit more valid. It's always nice when someone who has more knowledge than you also is stumped. It's like if I miss a lumbar puncture and then the attending also misses a lumbar puncture, I feel a little bit better.
You're like, yes,
I'm not that bad. Yeah. Right. But he just like really went out of his way to like give me a lot of positive feedback. And then at the end of our conversation, he was like, throughout residency, you're just going to get so much negative feedback and you're not going to get as many thank yous. I'm going to get recognized for all of the like things you do right. So I just want to like make sure that you heard some like good things, which was really, really nice. Like shout out to Dr. Hallowell.
I don't know who he is, but I like him already. Sounds like the attending that I want to be.
Yeah, he was great. But then like, the next week or two, like I had another attending who like just like pulled apart every single thing I did on rounds and would like constantly be like, well, why did we do this? Well, why did we do this? And I'm like, I just went off of, like what the consulting service gave me their expertise on. And sometimes like I don't have the capacity to know the answer to every single question, unfortunately. But then you feel really, really incompetent because you're like, why don't I know the answer? Why didn't I know how to address that? And I spent a lot of time having to like recenter myself of being like, it's okay. I am not expected, nor will I need to know every single thing about every single organ system. And I will never be an expert because medicine is always evolving. And anyone who tells you that they're an expert in the field is probably not, because there's new research popping up like every single day that changes guidelines and changes practices that we learned even in med school a year or two ago. So it's okay to not know, but you still feel like crap when you don't know.
No, it's just like a natural feeling, because the expectations are always so high. But I think one thing that made me feel a little bit better is, I worked with an attending. I'll be vague, and I won't say where it was or when it was, but they gave me some pretty harsh feedback. It was fair feedback. It wasn't like unfair or anything, but it made me feel not super great. And she was like, I expect more from you, Asadian. Like, you can do this. You can do this. You're smart. You're capable. You can do this. And so I want you to see you improve on this. And I just felt so low. And I was just like, I'm dumb. I'm worse than the other interns, da 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 da. And then I read a discharge summary that this attending had written when she was an intern, because I had a patient who had delivered a baby like a long, long time ago. And I saw like the discharge summary, and it was the worst discharge summary I'd ever read, for lack of a better term. And it's because she was probably a very tired intern when she was an intern, right? And I think it's funny because I'm like, man, dude, some of these attendings like literally forget that like intern year is just so freaking exhausting and that we make mistakes. But I also kind of reshifted this, and I was like, I think the attending does remember what intern year is like and still felt like I was capable enough and smart enough to be pushed and to receive that feedback. And that actually really helped me kind of reframe it, because I was like, no, she believes in me. Like, she actually just wants me to do better.
Yeah, that tough love.
I mean, it was tough love. You guys, OBGYN is just all tough love. Like, if you're thinking of going into OBGYN, yeah, it's humbling. It's very humbling.
Yeah. I think surgical specialties, your experience will be so different. Your hours, your cases, your patient outcomes, they're very, very different from medicine. And one thing that Mariam mentioned that I really liked was talking to other interns. That's so important. And we don't have enough time to really get together with interns. At least I don't feel like I do, because whatever quality time I do have outside the hospital, I really want to spend with like my loved ones or like my friends outside of medicine or at other like, in other states and things like that. So it's kind of tricky to like also, want to bond and spend time with like your co-residents and your co-interns. But I will say like sometimes I'll have very like humanizing conversations with other interns or like other seniors who will be like, oh yeah, I've worked with that attending. They can be really harsh. And like, even though it's such a small thing, it really, really makes that
it validates you.
Yeah. Like that whole experience I had, I feel so much better because a lot of the time I put a lot of pressure on myself that like I made the mistake. I did this wrong. I'm not up to par. Everyone else is doing so much better than me. I felt like that way more in intern year than I ever did in med school, because in med school I was like, la-di-da, I'm a med student. They don't expect me to know anything. And if I do have a plan, even if it's wrong, they're going to be impressed. Like that's kind of what you tell yourself, As an intern, it's like I feel the intense stress of like really not knowing what my plan is and like needing to figure that out in a very quick, short period of time. Like you will get an admit in the middle of rounds and you're expected to like break off, read about them, go see them in the ED, and then present them at the end of rounds and be like, this is my plan. Even if you haven't had time to really understand what's going on, which sounds really scary. But like Mariam was saying, you adjust so naturally to these things. My biggest fear was like having to double my patient load from going as a sub-I to becoming an intern. And I was so petrified of that. And yet now I can do it. And I don't think twice about it. And when I'm capped, I'm like, oh, like I didn't even realize that I was capped and that this is like double the amount of patients I ever carried as a medical student, on top of the fact that now I'm putting all their orders, signing all their meds, doing all their discharge, doing all their follow-up. Like there's so much more that you do as well. And so it's nice to also take a moment and be like, wow, like you really do progress just through like, I don't know if it's fight or flight. I don't know what it is. I don't know if you're like building more memory bridges or what, but you figure it out. But it is nice to have other peers that like really, really humanize the experience for you and tell you that they're struggling or tell you that something's hard, because it is. And we definitely think like a lot of times it's just me, you know?
Yeah. You're not alone is the moral of the story. Okay, well, we're kind of like at time, I think. First of all, thank you, Lily. Shout out, Lily. I didn't want to do this episode with anybody. And it's not just because we're doing intern year at the same time. I feel like I vent to Lily a lot about intern year.
As you should.
It's been a little bit of a difficult year, but at the end of the day, I'm very happy that I'm here. I'm excited that I am a doctor. It's weird being called Dr. Asadian by my patients and by the nurses that I work with. I'm like, who? And then I'm like, oh yeah, that's me. And it's definitely a privilege, and I'm so excited to continue this training. And yeah, that's the positive note that I will end this episode with.
I think it's a beautiful example of the fact that it took us over 3 months to even get on this podcast episode together, because you're just struggling through intern year.
Listen, I literally, for all the people who are listening right now, this episode was like literally not going to get recorded because I kept rescheduling it because I was like either still in the hospital or in clinic, or literally just had like no energy left in my body. And that's okay because we finally got here and it's fine.
Exactly.
But yeah. Okay. Well, thank you all for listening. This was a really, I think, healing and cathartic episode for me to record, especially with Lily. So for all of our listeners, I am very sad to announce, I guess this is like more bittersweet, but very sad right now in the moment to announce that this is indeed my last episode of Bundle of Hers as a full-on host. I have really enjoyed my time with Bundles. I think I started, was it my second year of medical school, and now I'm an intern. It's been a huge blessing and has been a really important space for me to connect with my community and tell stories and focus on the things in medicine that I find really important. And I've just felt so fortunate to be a part of this community. And I've felt so fortunate to be a part of it with some of my best friends. And I just feel like this is a really unique space. And now I actually am emotional. I told Chloe that I wasn't going to cry. No, it's fine. I'm fine. But I'm going to really miss this space, and I'm going to really miss the community. I wanted to do this episode because I wanted to highlight that intern year is really difficult, even though it's a really amazing time. And at this time, I feel like I really need to focus on this stage of my training, but I will always, always be a huge fan of Bundles and always promote the show and maybe even be a guest star in future episodes. Specifically with Lily, because I feel like our episodes are always just so bomb. Anyway, but I'm gonna miss this space a lot, and I'm just really appreciative to have been on this podcast. And yeah, I'll just leave it at that. For all of you who are loyal followers of Bundle of Hers, continue to listen in on our podcasts wherever you podcast. You can follow us officially on Instagram at Bundle of Hers. And yeah, I will, I was going to say I'll see you in on the next episode, but
it's not a goodbye. It's a see you later.
It's not a goodbye. It's a see you later. Okay, bye. Okay, sorry, that was awkward.